Well, guys, let's go ahead and talk about these strikes Donald Trump carried out over the weekend in 3 separate locations over in Iran. He was hoping that he was going to destroy their nuclear weapon capabilities, except the only problem with this whole thing is there didn't seem to be an imminent threat against the United States that would give Donald Trump the unilateral authority to carry out these strikes all on his own. And before we go ahead and go any further, I just want to say that I don't think Iran having a nuclear weapon is a good idea. I have no love for the Iranian regime, but I'm also willing to admit that foreign policy is not my area of expertise. It's not really my area of interests, and so I could be missing information that could make me change my mind one way or the other. So I just do want to mention that here at the top. But when we're talking about strikes like this that are preeminent in nature, normally these things are deliberated in Congress before the authority is handed to the president to carry the strikes of this magnitude out. But that's not what happened here. And it might be one thing if the intelligence showed that the supreme leader over in Iran was actually putting together a nuclear weapon, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Here is even Thomas Massie, a Republican, saying that the imminent threat did not exist. If you guys do appreciate my work, please do remember to subscribe.
Support you, but the Speaker of the House, who is from your own party, has really rejected this. He says the Article 1 power of Congress really allows for the president to do this. It was a limited, necessary, targeted strike, he says.
Well, he's probably referring to the War Powers Act of 1973, but that's been misinterpreted. There was no imminent threat to the United States, which was what would authorize that. And I think that's peculiar to hear that from the Speaker of the House. Look, Congress was on vacation last week when all this was happening.
You haven't been briefed on any of
We
the details.
haven't been briefed. They should have called us all back. And frankly, we should have debated this War Powers resolution that Ro Khanna and I offered instead of staying on vacation and doing fundraisers and saying, oh, well, the president's got this under control. We're going to cede our constitutional authority.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty big problem to me, but this is what we have come to expect from the Trump regime. Donald Trump just thinks that he can act any way that he wants to act, and then all of the Republicans fall in line and say, oh, no problem, sir. Go ahead and do your thing, sir. If you want to drop bombs on another country, even though there's no imminent threat against the United States, well, you just go right ahead. And the problem with this whole thing is that only a few people in Congress were briefed or even notified that this strike was going on before it actually happened. And I think only one Democrat, Chuck Schumer, he was told that a strike was going to happen, but the details as far as where the strike was occurring and who it was against, I don't think that those details were made clear to him. And that is a huge, huge problem, especially when you're talking about the intelligence that we have gathered saying that nothing has really changed. And I just want to break this down a little bit further because we did get a report a few weeks ago that said that Iran had enriched uranium to 60%, but you need 90 to 95% to build a nuclear weapon. So while we do not want to see countries enriching uranium to 60% because it's a short jump over to 95%, we didn't have any intelligence to suggest that the supreme leader in Iran had made the call to go ahead and ramp it up to nuclear weapons grade uranium. So the whole thing just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because the intelligence hasn't changed. And even we have the vice president of the United States saying as much. Like, we can all agree that maybe Iran, we don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, but there was no intelligence to say that that is what they were trying to do in this moment. So for Donald Trump to just go ahead and carry out this strike anyways seems to be a little messed up.
Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said in March that, quote, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Democratic Senator Mark Warner, the vice chair of the Intelligence Committee, said he was briefed on Monday that, quote, the intelligence hasn't changed. So why launch this strike now? Has the intelligence changed, Mr. Vice President?
Well, a couple of things about that, Kristen. So what Tulsi said back in March is that Iran was producing highly enriched uranium that was only consistent with them wanting to build a nuclear weapon. There's, of course, an open question about whether they were weeks away, whether they were months away, but they were way too close to a nuclear weapon for the comfort of the President of the United States, which is why he took this action.
Yeah, so you have the Vice President of the United States saying, well, you know, we had our Director of National Intelligence. She came out in March and said, even though there is 60% enrichment as far as Iran's uranium goes, nothing is here to say that they were trying to build an actual nuclear weapon. And I know this might seem a little loosey-goosey to everybody out there, but there's a big difference between having 60% versus having 90 to 95% enriched uranium. And I'm not exactly sure what that timeline would be, but again, the intelligence said that there was no order given over in Iran to start building a nuclear warhead. So even if we agree that Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons, we can all agree on that. That's fine. But they weren't trying to build one in this moment anyways. So for the president to just unilaterally go out there and make this decision, even though this imminent threat did not exist, seems to be against the law, seems to be against the Constitution. Now, if there was, a situation where we had intelligence that the supreme leader had directed their scientists or their military to go ahead and start assembling a nuclear warhead, that would be a whole different story. And the calculation would obviously change, but that is not what we had here. Here's J.D. Vance going on to say that, well, we trust the intelligence, but we also trust our instincts.
Do you and President Trump trust the U.S. intelligence community and its assessments?
Oh, of course we trust our intelligence community, but we also trust our instincts. And most importantly, we trust what the intelligence was telling us about the Iranians stonewalling the negotiation. I think that is really the hidden story here, and something the media has got to report a little bit more here, is that the Iranians stopped negotiating in good faith. That was the real catalyst, I think, to what the president ultimately decided to do. If we were having a productive negotiation, I think that this could have gone in a much different pathway. Unfortunately, the Iranians decided to stonewall us, and we saw the consequences of that last night.
Yeah. The problem with this whole thing is the Trump administration is not a reliable source of information. And what it appears to be is maybe even the Trump administration itself wasn't approaching these negotiations in good faith. And they got all butthurt that Iran didn't join them on one particular meeting, and then they went down this whole array of thoughts saying, oh, well, they're stonewalling us. We're gonna have to do something about this, because this is what the Trump administration does. Donald Trump thinks that he has the upper hand on every single person out there. He thinks that he should be able to call the shots on every single meeting out there. And even if you have Iran, maybe they're not playing in good faith. But neither is this administration, it seems. Now, like I said, I don't think Iran should have a nuclear weapon. I think the diplomacy going into Iran should continue. But we should all not forget that it was Donald Trump in his first term that tore up the first Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, I believe is what it was called. Donald Trump shredded that up because it had Obama's name on it. And if he hadn't done that in the first place, we wouldn't have been in this scenario to begin with, where you've got Donald Trump unilaterally taking authority to strike Iran. That should not be lost on anybody. Donald Trump shredded that deal up. He lit a fire, and now he is pouring gasoline on that fire, all because he didn't want Obama's name attached to any achievements in the region or at all. It is absolutely insane, and this all could have been avoided if Donald Trump wasn't such a petulant man baby. Now here we've got Marco Rubio, saying that, well, our intelligence, the intelligence assessments, they really don't matter, guys.
Are you saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the supreme leader had ordered weaponization?
That's irrelevant. I see that question being asked in the media. That's an irrelevant question.
No,
they have
that is
everything
the
they need
key
to build a
point in
weapon.
U.S. intelligence assessments. You know that.
No, it's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
the political decision had
well,
not
I know
been
that better
made.
than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
But
you don't
I'm
know,
asking
you
you
don't
whether
know
the
what you're
order
talking
was
about.
given.
And the people who say that, it doesn't matter if the order was given. They have everything they need to build nuclear weapons. Why would you bury things in a mountain, 300 feet under the ground?
Right.
Why would you bury why do they have 60% enriched uranium? You don't need 60% enriched uranium. The only countries in the world that have uranium at 60% are countries that have nuclear weapons.
Nuh-uh, guys. Nuh-uh. That's not, nuh-uh. I know better than you do. Nuh-uh. I mean, what is this nonsense? The question is very simple. Was there intelligence that we saw that would make you believe that Iran was now trying to build a nuclear warhead? That is the question. And Marco Rubio says, oh, intelligence doesn't matter. We already know that they've got an enrichment facility buried into a mountain, except we've known that has existed. We've known that they have been enriching uranium. We didn't know how far they were before, I think, a few weeks ago when we knew exactly how much uranium they had enriched at 60%. But Marco Rubio, he's just trying to play games here. Like I said, we can all agree that Iran having a nuclear weapon is probably not a good thing. But there was no new intelligence to suggest that they were trying to build a nuclear warhead. That is why it would be so important to go deliberate with Congress so we could go over these intelligence assessments. And if we wanted to have a policy change on saying, well, we think 60% enriched uranium is too far, then we could have had those discussions. But instead, Donald Trump just took the authority all for himself and carried out this elaborate scheme to bomb Iran. And now it's just all insane. This is not how we are supposed to be operating in the United States. Now, like I said, if Donald Trump had new intelligence assessments that said, well, shit, Iran is 2 weeks away from a nuclear warhead, and we had intelligence to verify these things, we would have been in a whole separate ballgame. But that is not what happened. Marco Rubio goes on to continue to just pretty much throw away the idea of these intelligence assessments.
That's a question. That's a question of intent, and you know, in the intelligence assessment, that it was that Iran wanted to be a threshold state and use this leverage. I'm talking about the public March assessment, and that's why I was asking you if you know something more from March.
But that's also
an
an inaccurate representation
given.
of it. That's an accurate representation of it. That's not how intelligence is read. That's not how intelligence is used. Here's what the whole world knows. Forget about intelligence. What the IAEA knows. They are enriching uranium well beyond anything you need for a civil nuclear program. So why would you enrich uranium at 60%? Right. If you don't intend to one day use it to take it to 90 and build a weapon? Right. Why are you developing ICBMs? Why do you have 8,000 short-range missiles and 2,000 to 3,000 long mid-range missiles that you continue to develop? Why do you do all these things? They have everything they need for a nuclear weapon. They have the delivery mechanisms, they have the enrichment capability, they have the highly enriched uranium that is stored. Yes. That's all we need to see.
Right. Well,
especially in the hands of a regime that's already involved in terrorism and proxies and all kinds of things around. They are the source of all instability
and no one's
in the Middle East.
No one's disputing that. I'm not doing that here. And they were censured at the IAEA for that enrichment and for violating their non-proliferation agreements. I was simply asking if we had intelligence that there was an order to weaponize, because you said weaponization ambitions.
Well, we have intelligence that they have everything they need to build a nuclear weapon, and that's more than enough.
So this is just Marco Rubio trying to come up with a post hoc reason as to why it was okay for Donald Trump to carry out these strikes, even though the intelligence assessment showed nothing new. Now, he did say a couple things that are true here, right? They did have uranium that was enriched up to 60%. Like I said, you need to go up to 90 to 95% to have a nuclear warhead. They did have the 60% enriched uranium. But like I said, the problem with the whole thing is there was no intelligence to suggest that they were trying to build a nuclear warhead. He's also right to say that anything enriched past 3 to 5% doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because, you know, that's all you really need for like nuclear power or other civil project is about 3 to 5% enrichment. And they were not abiding by the agreement with the, what's it called? The the International Atomic Energy Agency, I believe is what it's called, their new report did show that they had far more enriched uranium at 60% than they had otherwise realized. And so they were actually, a resolution was voted on to censure them or whatever the proper terminology would be, to kind of reprimand them because they were going around the rules of the nuclear proliferation. And so these are the things that we did know. But it's much different to say that you don't like those things versus, oh, the supreme leader gave the order to start assembling, to start creating, to start making a nuclear weapon. That is not what the intelligence showed. That is why we should have been deliberating in Congress. That is why we should have went back to our intelligence agencies. And if we wanted to rework the policy as far as what we wanted to allow Iran to do, we could have had those conversations. But because Donald Trump thinks he's a king, because Donald Trump doesn't want to go through Congress, Donald Trump bombed shit, and now he's asking questions later. Now he's trying to assemble a story to make himself sound more reasonable for carrying out these strikes. And I think that that is absolutely un-American. I don't know if I would use that terminology here. I just don't think it is the proper way to go. Like I said, Iran maybe shouldn't have nuclear weapons, but we should still be following the rules and the norms and the laws here in this country instead of letting Donald Trump strip all of this authority for himself and carrying out strikes of this magnitude all by his lonesome. That is absolutely insane, and we should stand up and fight back against that. So that's kind of an update on this whole nuclear strike, or this Iran strike that happened over the weekend. Like I said, I am not well versed in foreign policy. It is not one of my areas of interest, I guess you could say, but I did read quite a bit about how they came to this decision. I tried to read a little bit about where the nuclear program in Iran actually stood, how it kind of came to be. And I just want to mention one more time, this may have all been avoided if Donald Trump didn't come in his first term and rip up the Iran nuclear deal that Obama and his administration worked very, very hard on. We could have avoided all of this. So now Donald Trump has ripped up that agreement. It was probably pretty reasonable to think that they were going to start enriching uranium again, and that's exactly what they did. And now Donald Trump is using that as an excuse to escalate tensions in the region just because he couldn't let that Iran nuclear deal stand on its own during his first term. It's absolutely insane. Now, Iran has retaliated. As far as I know, at the time of this recording, there has been no casualties reported as far as American soldiers go. They targeted a base on Qatar, I believe it was. But we will just have to see how this whole thing escalates. This was a preeminent strike on Iran by the United States. It seems to me that if we wanted to, obliterate some of these nuclear facilities, it seems more reasonable that we would, pass on the weapons to Israel and they could carry it out. That way it doesn't drag us further in to this war. But like I said, I am no expert on this matter, and I will just go ahead and leave it there. So I will leave it there for now, guys. If you guys got anything out of this video, please do remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share it with a friend or two. I very much appreciate that. We are trying to build something here on the left that adequately pushes back against the right-wing media ecosystem that just launders all of this authoritarian nonsense for Donald Trump day in and day out. So if you do like what I do here, please do remember to smash that subscribe button. Of course, that is free. And if you guys want to see how Caroline Leavitt was promising that a decision had not yet been made on these Iran strikes just a couple days ago, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. It's quite wild looking at it now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.